You start the process with pre-planning. You want to frame your questions to test specific hypotheses, and we use the business model canvas to do that. Ideally, you want to design pass-fail experiments. So you go in with a specific question in mind, and you leave knowing whether that individual passed or failed the experiment. In the business model canvas, you have a series of assumptions. Some of them are low-risk assumptions, and some of them are risky assumptions. Customer discovery is a time-consuming process, and so you want to save the customer discovery process for the riskiest assumptions. Figure out where your business is most likely to fail or where the tower in this analogy might tumble down, and spend your time on those assumptions first. In the pre-planning process, sometimes we ask the question, who should we talk to? And the answer is anybody in or around the problem. Ideally, you want to map out the whole customer universe. We often create a stakeholder map to do this. And there are a variety of ways you can connect, through LinkedIn, through networks, and other things like that. Another interesting insight is that if you start in the middle of a company, you're more likely to get response. If you start with the CEO and you're wrong about your assumptions, which you probably are, you don't get a second chance. But sometimes middle managers in a company don't get asked for their advice. So if you approach them with a genuine desire to learn about their business, they're often willing to help. Another trick that we've learned around customer discovery is inside a company, sometimes people will help you by scheduling a block of interviews. And so if you ask for a conference room for an afternoon and schedule 20 or 30-minute slots with people, you can often talk to a dozen people in one afternoon. Customer discovery interviews need to be done face-to-face. If you want to try and do this on the phone or through surveys, it just doesn't work. On the phone, it's likely that the person you're talking to is reading their emails or doing other things. And what you miss is all the other important information. Are they leaning in and seeming interested, or are they leaning back? That's the kind of information you can't get in a survey or in a phone call. Another important consideration is you can't outsource customer discovery. You can't give this to your sales guy and ask him to come back and tell you whether or not the customer likes the idea. And the reason for this is if you're wrong, the salesperson might be uncomfortable coming back to tell the boss that the idea is not going to work. The person in charge needs to be in the room to hear what the customer has to say, because we're in the search phase, not the execution phase. And if it turns out you're wrong, which often you are at the start, be prepared to pivot your model before you invest too many resources. In customer discovery, you also have to be willing to be a little bit aggressive, or as we like to joke, be prepared to make bail. That's not to say you want to be rude, but you have to be aggressive in order to get to people. We run a National Science Foundation program, and we encourage people to tell people they're part of that program. Or if you're a student, play the student card. People are more willing to help you. Or as Steve Blank likes to point out, tell someone you heard they were the smartest guy in a particular industry, and you have some valuable insights. Being an entrepreneur is licensed to be a little bit pushy. But the real bottom line here is if you're willing to approach someone with an earnest desire to learn about their business, usually they want to talk to you. In some cases, people have been a little creative in terms of offering various ways to get customers to talk to them, and there's a lot of ways that you can do that. The bottom line is you're going to have to be a little creative and a little bit aggressive. Another important consideration in customer discovery is keep it casual. Don't ask for an hour-long meeting. Simply say, I need 20 minutes of your time. The setting is also important. Ask if you can buy them a cup of coffee at the cafe. If they usher you into a conference room, it's going to change the dynamic. You want people to be comfortable and relaxed and talking about their problems in a genuine way. And having a cup of coffee or meeting casually at a conference can be a better way to do that. You also want to manage expectations. Don't set them up for a pitch and let them know that you really don't have the product fully designed, but you're at the discovery phase where it's most important to hear about what they have to say. When you go in for the interview, there is a process and an arc to the way the interview goes. Usually you'll want to introduce yourself. You come prepared to listen and really convince them that what they have to say is important. You shouldn't be talking much. You should mostly be prompting them to talk about their problems, their business. Let the conversation flow and be open to ideas. The interview may follow a pacing or an interview arc. It could start with building some rapport and drilling down, eventually you hope to get the customer or that stakeholder to the point where they're telling really juicy stories. That's where some really good customer discovery insights may come from. There's also a good tip, which is you may want to take a picture of the setting with the person's permission, or even record the interview, because there's a lot of rich insights that can get lost. And a picture itself may prompt you later for some recollections about the interview that could be useful. Customer discovery is not about pitching your product. We'll talk more about this in another context with the mom test, but the idea is you don't get good information if you come in pitching your product. You want to ask open-ended questions and learn as much as you can about that customer. Part of what you want to understand is the customer archetype. Why do they buy? Where do they buy things? Where do they spend their money? What do they read? You want to learn as much as you can to develop a whole view of that customer. In a business context, it may be who they report to and what their budget authority is. With this information, it can help you understand not just what their requirements are, but how you might ultimately sell inside an organization, or what sort of disposable income someone might have to purchase your product. There are two key questions that you should always end your interviews with. The first is, what else should I have asked you? You may be probing on something that's a small problem, and they may have a larger problem somewhere else. That's important information that you would have otherwise missed. The other question is, who else should I talk to? There may be someone else who's closer to the problem, who has a more intense need, and this person could refer you to that person. In getting a referral, it's nice to have a name. It's even better if they're willing to say it's okay to use their name, or better still, if they're willing to write you a referral or introduce you via email. That will help get you to other people more quickly. Rob Fitzpatrick's book, The Mom Test, provides some elegant and simple ideas around customer discovery. We're going to highlight some of these here based on Rob's book. The basic idea of the mom test is that people are optimistic about the future and fuzzy about the past. So if you ask someone about a future question, they're likely to say they like the idea, and if you ask them about problems in the past, they don't remember them very well. And so the mom test and the way we frame questions is about giving us good discipline to ask good questions. The idea behind the mom test is you want to ask questions in a way that even your mother couldn't lie to you. If you come to your mom with a new idea, she might be likely to not want to hurt your feelings and tell you that she likes your idea. Customers are probably the same way. They don't want to intentionally lie to you, but they also see that you're an entrepreneur and they don't want to hurt your feelings, and they may want to encourage you. So you need to ask questions in a way that they're not just trying to encourage you, but you're actually getting meaningful and important data. So instead of talking about your idea, you need to talk about their life, their problems. Instead of asking about would they do certain things in the future, you want to ask about specific problems they've had in the past. You want to talk less and listen more, and keep them from being overly optimistic about the future by anchoring them in specific past behaviors. Good question, bad question is based on the idea of what makes a good mom test question and how do we talk to customers in an effective way. Do you think it's a good idea? This is probably a bad question. You're practically inviting your customers or your mom to lie to you because they don't want to hurt your feelings. They're likely to tell you that you like their idea. So this is not a good way to approach a customer. Would you buy a product that did X? Is it a good question or a bad question? This is also probably a bad question. It's a future-looking question, asking them to speculate on what they might do in the future. Instead, you'd be better off saying, when did you last buy a product that did X? That's anchoring them in past behaviors rather than asking them to speculate about the future. Now, X may have to be defined broadly. You may have a different way to solve their problems, so you may have to unpack how they're solving a problem to figure out whether or not they'll buy their product. But you still want to anchor them in past behaviors rather than asking them if they'd like to buy your product in the future. The exception would be if your product is done and you're ready to put a purchase order in front of them, then this would be a valid question. But if you're doing the customer discovery at the right point, you're figuring this out well before you've actually built a product, and so you don't want to ask this question. How much would you pay for a product which did X? Again, probably a bad question because it's future looking. Instead, you'd like to figure out what they're currently spending to do X. So, if they've bought a specific product that does X, you can ask them about that. You might also have to think more broadly. They may have some members of their team who they're paying currently to work on X. So you may have to ask how many people are working in this area, what fraction of their time they might spend on a particular problem. Again, anchor in past behaviors around how they're doing X and what they're spending for it, rather than asking them if they'd buy your product at a certain price point. What would your dream product do? Is it a good question or is it a bad question? This one is mixed. It's certainly open-ended, and it's good to get customers to speculate about different solutions that they might have been thinking about. The problem here is if you talk to a group of customers, you may get a whole bunch of different answers, and you'll end up with a product that you can't possibly build. So the customer owns the problems, and they can give you all kinds of suggestions, but you own the solution. It's up to you, through a series of customer discovery interviews, to figure out what's the minimum subset of things that are going to solve problems for enough customers to make my product viable. So it's not a bad question, but you should treat the results with a little caution. Why do you bother? Is it a good question or is it a bad question? This is probably a good question. Understanding the motivations underlying a particular issue are important. It may be that their annual performance bonus is tied to something, or it may be that it's not a big issue to them. It may simply be a nuisance. Getting to know their motivations and their underlying problems is important. And so this is probably a good question if you can get them talking more about their problem.